My parents were immigrants. They came from Hong Kong to Singapore in the mid 80s. And I was born when they were still at the crossroads of whether they wanted to be in Singapore for the long term. And I think that was actually an interesting environment for me because I was born into the expat community. I was hanging out with international kids. And then suddenly my parents decided that they wanted to be Singaporeans and they were offered to be Singaporeans in the very early 90s. So I grew up with an international community and then I went to local school for primary school. So in that sense, I grew up with a perspective of hanging out with people from all races. I was also quite athletic. I love sports, notably swimming. I actually swam a lot as a child, and I was invited to go for the national team trials when I was probably about 11 years old or so. It was a very clear path from the coach and from the team that by 15, I had to compete in my first SEA Games. That was the goal, to train for the next 4 years intensively, go for gold. And back in the 90s, Singapore was doing quite well in swimming. So that was like the dream, right, for a lot of aspiring professional swimmers. And the funny thing is, my mom was the one who got me into swimming, and she was also the one who pulled me out of swimming. She refused to let me go for national team trials. She refused to let me even continue past the age of 12 swimming competitively or semi-competitively because she didn't want me to be a national swimmer. So I would say that was probably one of the defining things of my childhood, training so hard, being forced to train, and then suddenly pulled out of the system and like, okay, you can't train at all. She wanted me to have the life skill of swimming. She wanted me to have the discipline of training, but she didn't want me to have a career in professional sports because I think traditional Asian parent, you need to have a job that's more stable, right? You need to have something that doesn't require you to retire by 25 because swimmers, a lot of them, especially in this part of the world, you retire quite young. Definitely not like some of the global athletes like NBA where they play till they're close to 40. I think for swimmers, the journey ends quite early. She didn't want me to go down that path. She wanted me to be Asian in that sense.
And your grandparents were quite a big influence on you as well, right? Growing up.
I wouldn't say they were a big influence because I actually didn't hang out with them as much because I was an expat kid. But the one thing that I know was that my grandparents were extremely, extremely poor. So my grandfather was a coolie where he would carry rice from the boats into the ports. And then my grandmother was a cleaner in apartment blocks. And so I grew up with stories from my parents that my grandparents had 6 children, they couldn't put food on the table, and they lived day to day, which I think formed a lot of the values that my parents had when it came to frugality, when it came to the value of money and opportunity. And they themselves came from a very, very poor environment in terms of not having money constantly. There were days that they had no money. So when they came over as expats, given an expat package in Singapore in the 90s, was a big deal for the family. It was a big deal for them because they were the first in their household to kind of break out of that cycle of poverty. And to live an expat life here in Singapore was the dream for many people, not just from Hong Kong, but from all parts of the world. But I think what struck me was they never lost sight of where they came from. And I think in Chinese, there's that phrase or 成语 called 饮水思源, right? Where they always remember where the stream came from. And so I grew up in that kind of environment where I think my grandparents and the lives that they led formed a lot of the value systems that I was brought up in as a child.
And do you feel like that influenced you greatly in the sense of, I need to find a stable job, probably as a lawyer, engineer, doctor, as all Asian kids probably are asked?
What was interesting was my parents, because they were able to provide for us as a middle income family, we were never in lack because they took that leap from moving from Hong Kong to Singapore and then being an expat, a professional here. My dad was a professional here. We were comfortable. We were middle class, expat package. We were taken care of. And when I grew up, I had everything that I wanted. We never had anything in one. I was the beneficiary of the first generation where I would say I had freedom, right? I had freedom of choice. I had freedom, the ability to pursue passion, for example. But strangely enough, my parents never imposed on me growing up. They just told me I can't be a professional swimmer, which I looking back, I agree. I wouldn't have wanted to be a professional swimmer, but they never gave me that pressure to do well in school. They never gave me that pressure to follow a path. In fact, they were really liberal in allowing me to pursue my wants and my path. I see it as privilege, right? I see it as privilege that I never had to choose a path because we needed the stable income. I never was forced to take engineering or medicine or law because my parents wanted it. I was free to choose. And for that, I think it was a unique environment that I was in.
So given that you had so much freedom to choose, were you clear on the kind of passions you were interested, say, by the time you went to A levels?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I was a mess like any other kid, right? I had no idea what I wanted to do. A levels was just a blur for me. I was having a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends. And, I realized the benefits of being around great friends, great people that spurred you on. And I had that environment growing up, right? Through my teenage years, I was blessed to have friends that were high achievers, way more successful, way more smart than me. And I think in the environment that I was in, people were striving to go to Ivy League universities. They were all getting scholarships to go overseas. And here I was just trying to figure out what I was going to do next, where I was going to go. But they would always challenge me. I think the great thing about some of my friends that I have is they were always questioning, they were always challenging, they were always striving. And that inspired me a lot to really ask myself, wow, look at my buddies. They're really going for it. What can I do for myself in the same manner, emulating some of those traits that they had? Even up to university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I went to a business school. I did a degree in economics. And the natural path for a lot of us in a business school was to work in a bank. And investment banking back then was the holy grail of the path of the most successful graduates. So naturally, again, being ambitious, being a young, striving student, okay, let's aim for investment banking because that's where everybody says we should go. And naturally, that became my North Star for a short while because I realized I was not very good at finance. I was not very good at math. I was not very good at numbers in general. I couldn't keep up. I couldn't compete in the same pace, in the same rigor as a lot of the people who were smarter than me in university. And I was by nowhere even close to getting an internship or placement in an investment bank. And I didn't like it at all. Like I was so bored of it. And so I realized that's really not the path for me. I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I knew where I couldn't go.
So I think second year at uni, that's when you started exploring alternative paths and you got into the real estate business as well.
Yeah, so at that point, I figured I was not going to get an internship in a prestigious bank where a lot of my friends were. I realized that neither did I want to do a 9 to 5 internship and get $500. I really wanted cash. I wanted to make money. I wanted to support myself because as a young uni student, I wanted to have the ability to pay for my own things, my own exchange programs, and do whatever I want, right? And that was probably the first thing I thought about. Like I wanted cash, but I also wanted to work or do a job that required little time. So I didn't want a job that paid by the hour. I wanted a job that would pay super high for doing the least amount of work. So that's the lazy side of me, right? Like maximum payout, least amount of work. And one of my buddies from junior college who went to uni with me, he actually became a real estate agent and he bought his first condo at 22 years old. And this was a swanky new condo in downtown Singapore. And I was like, dude, like we went to the same school. We've been friends for years. How are you buying a condo at 22 years old? And here I am figuring out how to make money by the hour. And he told me like, yo, it's the real estate boom. It's 2010, 2009. Real estate was really heating up in Singapore. It's so easy to get a license. And he just guided me. He was like, go get a license and you'll figure it out. And that's what I did. I got a license. I went for the course after school. It was really easy to get the license. And then I had to sort of figure out how to get deal flow. I knew that I didn't want to stand at show flats and hand out brochures and cold call people. I knew that that was probably not going to work because you're just competing with like 20,000 other people doing the same thing. I needed a unique advantage. And I realized that I had one because my parents were expats. So they have expat friends who probably have money and they had spare properties that they wanted to lease out. They maybe had friends that were migrating over who wanted a place to stay. And so I told my mom, like, can you call all your rich friends and tell them like your son is a real estate agent and ask them to let me represent them? And that's what she did. My mom was super supportive. She was like, okay, here's a deal. Can you go and rent this house out? Can you go and sell that for my friend? And it was fair game. It was not as if I was given exclusive because I was a friend's son. I was given the same opportunity as any other agent. And there were multiple agents on these deals, right? So it was like a free for all kind of scenario. But I was quite lucky. I was able to sell or lease out some of these properties relatively quickly, even though I was a rookie. It was my first year. And I got paid commissions. And it was like a luck thing, right? Like you could literally do like 10 viewings and not close a deal, or you could do one viewing and close a deal. And I was able to close a few deals quite early on that were on the lucky side, right? Like I did one viewing, the guy sees it for 15 minutes and he buys a $3 million property without batting an eye. And I was like, whoa, you get paid really quickly in this industry. There's no work to be done except for administrative forms. And the payout was handsome. So I was like, wow, this is it. This is my career path. This was so fun. And I spent 3.5 years through university just deep diving in the industry, getting my network out there, just expanding deal flows, and I was having so much fun doing it. It was a whole lot of fun to be able to see beautiful properties, to be able to talk to people from different walks of life who are coming through some of these properties, and go through the art of negotiation and sales. So I did all of that through my university.
So it sounds like you had something of a gift of a gap. You could just sell anything if you wanted to.
Yeah, I realized that like I was not very good at studying. I was just very mediocre at best. But then I realized like I had the ability to sell. People trusted me. I realized that it also helps that I look a bit older. So I was literally 21 years old when I sold my first apartment for my client. And I remember the guy who was buying it was an older gentleman. And then when he looked at my IC, he was like, dude, you're 21. And I'm like, yeah, I'm 21 years old. And he was like, are you kidding me? Like, I just bought a house from a 21-year-old. Did you scam me or fool me into this? I was like, no, this is what it is. You saw the house. It is everything. And he just looked at me in amazement. He was like, young man, you're going to go very far in this industry. And he was like the managing director of a big MNC, right? And I appreciated those compliments. And I started to think, right, like what are skills or talent that I had that could really allow me to pursue my career in a certain field. And I knew sales was it, right? I knew I was good at talking and convincing people to do things. And so I guess, yeah, gift of the gap, selling physical properties was the first real sort of work that I did that allowed me to discover or uncover a little bit of what I might call a bit of talent that I had, because I couldn't find anything else. I was not like super smart. I was not like super intellectual, or I couldn't do a lot of things. And this was like the first thing I realized I was better than most other people my age. So yeah, that was a bit of a discovery for me.
Weren't you inclined to go into this full time after graduation? Because it pays well and you were good at it.
So this is a transitionary point, right? Like I was finishing up uni, it pays well. The market has softened by 2013 when I was graduating. The market had softened with cooling measures from the government, and the market changed. I wouldn't say it crashed, but it changed. In the early 2010s or late 2000s, it was like a bull market, right? You close your eyes, you would sell property, right? You didn't need any skills or connections. Everybody was just buying because all these rich foreigners were coming into Singapore, just snapping up real estate. But then the government cooled the whole market down with all these cooling measures and taxes. And the market became more of a leasing market. There were a lot of expats coming in. They were opening up immigration policies. So I changed to become more of a leasing agent instead of buy sell, because that was pretty much it. And I was able to do that quite well as well. I became a bit of a relocation specialist where I would help big MNCs relocate senior management from New York or London and convince the vice presidents to move their entire family to Singapore. And it was my job to convince them. So HR give me a job. Okay, you got 1 week with my VP of this department, convince him, right? And show him around, and usually they would have fancy real estate budget, right? And it was good money because I was getting paid by the day, and I was getting paid every time I closed or I convinced them, and I was able to convince like a whole bunch of senior management to move to Singapore, right? And they were like, oh, you're really good at this, let's do like the entire two-year contract. But then I was driving home one day after closing a deal, and I realized I was nothing more than a glorified tour guide. And it hit me, right? Like I was just a tour guide showing people around how to use the MRT. This is this school, this is Orchard Road. This was also the time and the era where startups were starting to really come up. And I looked around and I saw a lot of interesting things happening globally. Like Airbnb, I remember, was just starting out. And I listened to the story of Brian Chesky and how he formed Airbnb. And then I heard about Y Combinator and Paul Graham and all these guys coming up. And this was early days, right? And I was like, wow, like it's so interesting, because in the world of real estate, it was all about commission. It was all about, let's get the biggest deal. Let's get a bigger deal. Let's close more deals and get more commission for yourself. But then when I was looking at some of these startups, like they were obviously really intelligent people, like super smart found. And all of them were like broke. All of them were like talking about this ramen profitability concept. They were all wearing flip-flops and t-shirts to work, and they all sleep under their desk. And I was so confused, right? Because my whole worldview was like, go and get more deals, close more commission. And then you had these really smart people who were like, I don't care about my current income. I really care about building something great, something impactful. And the word impact came, right? And a lot of people started talking about impact and why they're solving this problem or why this problem was worth solving. And I asked myself at that point, what problem am I solving and what value am I adding to the world? What impact am I creating as a real estate agent? And I realized like that was something I couldn't answer. Like I was making money for sure, but what was I doing with the money? So what if I had more money than last year, right? And I realized that money was not a big driver in terms of motivation for me or purpose. I was not interested in buying a branded belt. I was not interested in buying a branded watch. Like I had no material interest, probably because of my upbringing. And then I was like, so what if I close more deals? Does it change the lives of the people who buy or sell from me? And then I realized these are super rich people. Even if it was another agent, it would be no different to them. It's just another transaction. I was just facilitating transactions. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, I asked myself, graduating, the world is ahead of me. Am I really going to do this till I'm like 50 and just die and just do a whole bunch of paperwork in my whole life and have a whole bunch of money in my bank and have changed nobody's lives in the process? And that was a difficult thing for me to swallow. It was so hard for me to acknowledge that this is it. This is going to be your life. Lots of money, lots of paperwork. And I was like, wow, this was tough. And I think the catalyst that really pushed me off the cliff was my buddy who introduced me to this industry. He told me like, hey, I'm going to retire from real estate. I'm done. Like we're graduating. I'm done. I was like, what? We're supposed to be partners at the firm. The bosses were going to like train us up and let us become partners. And what do you mean you're done? He's like, yeah, there's no impact in this work. I'm going to move on to something else. And he was aligned in terms of how we were thinking about the world. And he was like, you know what? You can take all my clients. Your income will double next year. You can take all my clients, but I'm done. So he just like, bye. And he literally threw me all his clients. And here I was with all his clients. Huge income upside. But the guy who got me in quit. And he eventually became a pastor. And that really shook me up. And I was like, wow, like again, surrounded by amazing friends. That really challenged me. And I was like, wow, that is crazy. Like how much we have changed in perspectives in 3.5 years. So I was like, you know what? If you're done, I'm done. Right. So he was like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. If you're done, I'm done. And so I took all his clients and all my clients, and I just called up a random agent that I had worked with. And I'm like, look, I'm going to give you all my clients and my partner's clients. Want to take it? And he was like, what? Wait, what? I was like, yeah, just take it. Like, we're done. We're quitting. And he was like, what? I really don't understand why. And I'm like, yeah, just take it and don't ask too much. Just enjoy it. But I'm done. So that's how I quit.
So you spoke a lot about impact. Was it something that you heard when you were back at uni? I think you were doing this business studies teaching assistant for the Middle East for 13 weeks. And you met Professor Soon Loo as well, who had a big impact on you.
Yeah, so Professor Soon Loo was a big pivotal part of my journey with my co-founder because he was radical, right? This guy was completely radical. He was an entrepreneur himself. He was valedictorian of his MBA class from Harvard. He was roommates with Chatri from One Championship, and they built a .com in the 90s that was featured on Harvard Business Review, or they had a case study in Harvard Business School about their first startup, how they crashed and failed. I think they raised $100 million and failed because of the .com burst. And he was radical, right? Like he literally would make us do things, crazy things in class. And he gave us a lot of that. He gave us a mindset shift in terms of entrepreneurship. I would say he was one of the biggest reasons why entrepreneurship was so exciting, because he had this mindset that there is nothing you cannot achieve as a young entrepreneur or as somebody who wants to change the world. Like he had this whole thinking that if you set your mind onto something, you can achieve it. And that included climbing Mount Everest or becoming anything you wanted. And every class for 13 weeks, it involved an activity that would push us to achieve something that we would have never achieved before. Like there was this one class, right, where we were supposed to like close our eyes and dream about what we wanted to become in the next year or what we wanted to achieve. And then when we open our eyes after that dreaming session or brainstorm session, he would ask us to pick up the phone, make a few phone calls that would take us one step closer to achieving that. And he would like just let us out of the class to do that. And I was like, whoa, this guy is radical, right? So by that time, I was really thinking about entrepreneurship, thinking about my transition out from real estate. And he basically said, like, do one thing that will get you closer to your dream of becoming an entrepreneur. And that's where I signed up for coding bootcamp. Like, I realized I couldn't code. I realized I really needed skill sets. And that actually pushed me to actually register for a coding bootcamp because I wanted to be in the world of startups and technology.
And how was the bootcamp for you?
The bootcamp was terrible. I suck at coding. I actually went for this bootcamp after I graduated because I realized I had no skill sets that would facilitate or help me become a better entrepreneur. I had very little knowledge of coding, of technology, of the world of startups. I was reading and absorbing as much as I can. And I went in knowing that I'm not going to be a software engineer. My brain is just not wired in that way. I believe I have a bit of maybe ADHD type of condition where I cannot focus. Like I cannot sit in a room for a day or even an afternoon to just code. Like I need to be out and about. The salesman in me needs to go out and sell and meet people, right? So I went into the bootcamp with a very clear objective of actually learning code and understanding how technology works, but not actually becoming one myself. And the deeper hope was to meet a technical co-founder because I had an idea already that I wanted, and I wanted to meet some like coding genius, right? And that was really like this underlying goal. And I actually did that. I found my co-founder at bootcamp, right? So there was a fixed teacher for 10 weeks, I think. There was a teacher and he was all right. He was a good teacher. But then one week, right? I think week 4, week 5, the main teacher fell sick. And then we had this relief teacher come in. And he was this young Malaysian guy, school dropout, dropout of, I think it was University of Georgia. He dropped out, went to San Francisco, built some startups, came back to Southeast Asia, and he was trying to look for the next thing. And then he was teaching coding. And I remember like watching his slides and I was like, wow, this guy's a freaking coding genius, man. Damn. And I went up to him during the break and I told him about my idea. And I was just like, will you be my co-founder? Right? That was literally what I said to him. I was like, I need you to be my co-founder. You're a coding genius. You're the coding genius I wanted to meet. And he was like, wait, who the heck are you? And like, why would I ever be your co-founder? And I'm like, yeah, because you're in the middle of transition and you have nothing to do, right? That's what you said in your intro. I have an idea. Why don't you build it and I'll sell it? I can sell anything. And he was like, you're crazy, dude. Like, I don't even know you. And I'm like, no, trust me. Like, this is a great idea. So the salesman in me, right? Like, I sat down with him. I was like, meet me after class and I'll talk to you about this idea that I had. And that's exactly what I did. And he was so convinced by my idea. He was like, wow, that's probably one of the best ideas I've heard in a while. But he was like, okay, fine. Like, give me some time to think about it. I just met you.
Do you still remember that pitch that you gave him?
Yeah, I told him about the idea for Televate, which was the first startup that I wanted to build, right? So I told him like there was a problem with the call center industry. Consumers were pissed by waiting on the line. Technology needs to solve the customer experience for big banks and telcos. And I felt software and apps could help solve that problem. And he was like, whoa, that's a really interesting idea. Never thought of it that way. And eventually he told me this, like, I'll build an MVP and then you go sell it. I'm not going to be a co-founder, but I'll build it for you for free. Give me 2 weeks. I'll build you something that works. And then if you sell it, I'll be your co-founder. And so he disappears, right? Like he disappears for 2 weeks and he comes back, he calls me up. He actually takes a bus to Singapore, a coach, right? And he shows up and we meet in this Chinatown hostel and he was like, okay, test the app. So he built this web app that basically allows you to get a call back after you navigate a phone tree via a digital interface. For example, you instead of using the phone, you just select like, I want to talk to an operator about credit cards, about fraudulent transactions. And instead of waiting on the line for the operator to pick up, you would get a call back when the operator was ready. And he built that in 2 weeks. And I was like, brilliant, this is it, right? Like, this is enough. I'll build a deck and I'll sell it. And that's what happened. He disappeared. He was like, okay, call me when you sell something. And I was like, how do I even sell to banks? Like, why would any like CTO or CIO from a bank ever pick up a call from me? Like, I'm a nobody. So I figured I needed to really hustle because I had like a window where this guy could be my co-founder, right? And I did some crazy things, right? Like I actually Googled and I found that all the technology leads or heads from banks was going to gather at this like bank technology conference in Singapore. And I was like, brilliant. All my customers are going to be there at one shot. But the problem was one ticket was like $1,000 and I didn't have $1,000, right? So I actually did something that was probably illegal. But what I did was I wore a suit. I figured that I wouldn't have time to demo anything. So I wore a suit. I looked really professional. And I just walked into the conference without a ticket, right? And because I was wearing a suit, the people at the door actually didn't stop me. And I had also done my homework already. Like I knew who was the chief technology officer of DBS, ANZ, and I knew everybody. And I spotted them from afar and I just went straight up to them. I had to also wait for the right time, right? When they were going to the toilet or lunch break off stage. And I managed to meet 2 of them, DBS and ANZ. And I gave them this 1-minute elevator pitch. And they were like, wow, who are you? That's an interesting pitch. Here's my card. call me and come to my office. So that was that, right? Like I was like, whoa, it actually worked. Like the hustling worked. And I called this guy up, my potential co-founder, and I was like, dude, I got 2 meetings with the biggest tech guy at 2 of the biggest banks in Southeast Asia. You need to come in. You need to bring that demo and let's go. So that's actually what we did. We got the meeting with the heads. We were given probably 30 minutes for a demo. We went in there with the demo that he built in 2 weeks, did a live callback with a digital interface, and they looked at us and they were like, whoa, who the heck are you guys? But that was incredible. Let's integrate. Let's do a pilot, right? And we signed off 2 pilots like that. And that's when my co-founder, Josh, he said, look, wow, that was incredible. Like you actually sold it. Like you did it. Let's incorporate the company. Let's be co-founders. Let's go raise money and let's do this, right? So that was how it all started in a very, very crazy way.
So what went wrong? Because you did Televate from November 2013 to December 2014. That's quite a short window during which you also raised a seed investment as well.
Yeah, so we had this like 2-week-old MVP, and just at that point, StarHub, one of the big telcos, opened their first ever hackathon. So StarHub opened their API to developers and they said, look, we're going to launch a hackathon and we're going to invite interesting startups to come and build tools around it. So we literally already had a tool, and then we just plugged in their API and then we won the hackathon. And they were like, oh, we're going to like invest in you and this and that. And StarHub eventually didn't invest, but we managed to get a small investment from Singapore government supported by one of the venture funds. And it was not a lot of money, right? It was just a seed round. And we hired a small engineering team and we started building for these pilot studies, right? We had 2 big banks that were going to build. And as I continued to solve, I had also another telco that signed up. So we had 3 big enterprise customers signed up. And in the world of, I guess, enterprise sales, that was not bad for a company that had no money and had nothing, right? Then something happened in early 2014, which was something that we couldn't predict, right? Like I think in Q1 or Q2, Standard Chartered, one of the big banks in Singapore, actually leaked customer information because of a third-party software vendor or something like that, right? Like there was a leak somewhere from a third party. And when it comes to banks, like there's no excuse or there's no, I would say, grace when it comes to failing at a software level or leaking data. And this was also the time when data privacy and data laws were being aggressively thought of or implemented. And so the Monetary Authority of Singapore basically put a pause on all third-party integrations for all banks. And they basically required 2 things. They set up this new thing where you either needed to have amazing security credentials or business enterprise level insurance for all third-party software integrations. And the banks called us while we were building, right? They were like, hey, there's this new thing. What's your security credentials for the both of you? How many years in application security or software security on your team collectively? And my partner, my co-founder, was like a school dropout. I was an econ student, real estate sales guy, and we're like, 0? And they were like, okay, that's not gonna work. Okay, never mind. You can buy enterprise level insurance. So we're a big bank, right? The minimum level that we need you to insure for, the insurance plan is gonna cost you $2 million a year just for the insurance. And we're like, $2 million? Like, we have 50K in investments. That's about it, right? That's it. Like, that's all we got. Like, after that, we got no money, right? And we were like, what do we do? Like, they were like, sorry, this is the new rule. If you don't have it, we can't continue with this pilot. So we were like, okay, like, do we go back and raise $2 million just to pay for insurance? Like, no investor would do that, logically, right? Nobody would give us $2 million to buy insurance. And so we were kind of stuck. And we decided, like, this was a big mountain, a big externality that we couldn't overcome. It was too challenging. And it was just a big mountain that, like, we were going to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops, basically. And it was not worth the risk. It was just an impossible task because of these big factors that we couldn't control. So we talked to our seed investors. We talked to everybody. We tried to pivot. So we tried to pivot from like enterprise software to maybe building for SMEs where there was less regulation, but it just didn't work. Like our idea was so amazing for enterprises, but for SMEs, it was just not the same kind of wow factor. But we gave it a shot. We tried it for another quarter or so. It was probably one of the toughest periods of my journey, right? Just waiting for sales meetings with SMEs. I managed to convert like 20, 30 clients, but the deal size for each SME is probably like $50 a month. So it's like really depressing. We were broke, we were not getting paid. And it reached a really dry point where we started to ask ourselves, like, we're in our mid-20s. Is this the entrepreneurial dream? Broke. We couldn't even afford bus tickets for my co-founder to come to Singapore to meet me. He couldn't even afford the hostel anymore because we were broke. So he actually slept on the streets a couple of times when he was in Singapore. He drove his dad's car all the way from KL over just to have meetings with potential investors. And it was rough. It was really, really rough. And keep in mind, like, this was one of the most brilliant software engineers I've ever met, and still is till today in this part of the world. And it reached a point where he was like, you know what, I think it's probably time for us to think about our next move, because this doesn't look like it's going anywhere. And at the same time, he was given opportunities, like amazing opportunities were landing on his lap, and he was pushing them away because of this company we had started. And I told him, like, look, I don't think we can go very far at this point. Doesn't make sense to raise. Why don't you start entertaining some of these opportunities? I think it's time for us both to consider our next step. And that was one thing I learned from the literature of entrepreneurship from friends, which was like, you can't be emotionally attached to a company that's failing. Like, you can't hug a dead body in the grave. Like, you just can't hug a dead horse, right, and expect the horse to run super fast again. And so we decided just to cut it, end the relationship, and basically move on. That was how it all ended.
You said you had to cut off and look for something else. And that something else was something that started all the way back at university around 2011, 2012. Could you share a bit about that period of time and how you met Adrian, who I think you knew way earlier before as well?
So concurrently, like, Adrian was this old friend from A levels that I just had with me. He was just part of my life since we were like 17, 18. Like, we went through school, we went through army together, not actual same unit, but actually like we journeyed together because we were so close as friends. And then we decided to go to university together, same school, three of us. And he also had an entrepreneurial streak. While I was doing real estate, he was doing t-shirts. So he was printing t-shirts, but we took classes together in entrepreneurship and business because we were both sort of interested. And we were both like really mediocre students that also couldn't fit into the world of banking or corporate, for that fact. And he was a guy that was super creative, right? Like, he was always figuring things out on the internet. He was always creating stuff. He was really into design, and he started making memes in class. And we were together, and I was like, what are you doing? Why are you so busy on Photoshop? He was like, oh, I'm making memes, because like we started this page and then he would just populate it with stuff that was happening in school or in uni life in Singapore. And this page would get like a couple of likes here and there, a couple of shares. Sometimes it would be like 100 shares and 100 likes. And he was like making stuff all the time when we were in class, never listening, just always making stuff. I don't know how to use Photoshop. So I was like, I'll just feed you information because I'm always reading the news feeds or news. So I was like, hey, this part of Singapore is flooded. Oh, the trains broke down. Like, I'll just send him stuff like, oh, go make memes. And I would just kind of like help him out there. And he was like the main guy behind it. He was super passionate. And we started this in 2012 in class, and he ran it through the next 2 years in school, right? And some of the memes would really go viral, and I'll be like, wow, that's amazing, dude. Like, this is crazy. I can't believe like thousands of people are looking at the shit we're making in class.